In the dusk and champagne-colored streets of Paris, exquisitely formal yet alight with bohemianism, they found a world that was briefly defined by the golden principle of freedom. What a time this must have been. The art was as jagged and alive as a crack of lightning. The air was charged with a sense of purposeful change. It was an ambience in which a woman, with sufficient means, could be mistress, spectacularly so, of her own destiny.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this American Inspiration event presented in partnership with the website Ephemeral New York and ably produced by GBH Forum Network. It's great to have you with us tonight in the land of history, looking at the experiences of women, American women and European women during the Gilded Age, 1870 to 1910. I'm Margaret Talcott, Director of Literary Programs at American Ancestors, New England Historic Genealogical Society, and the producer of its American Inspiration Author Series. On your screen is the schedule for our hour-long event featuring Laura Thompson, Betsy Prioleau, and moderator Esther Crain, all of them experts who've written books on today's topic. Of course, the real education and delight comes from reading the source materials for today's talk, the just published works, popular works of these remarkable women. Laura Thompson, our first featured author, has penned many acclaimed works, making great forays into British literary and cultural history. Her most recent book is a cross-Atlantic account called Heiresses, The Lives of the $1 Million Babies. Betsy Prioleau, our second featured writer, is also prolific, an historian and a professor. Her most recent book is Diamonds and Deadlines, a tale of greed, deceit, and a female tycoon in the Gilded Age. Our event today is at the intersection of their insight. Copies of both Laura's and Betsy's works can be purchased through our partners at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Mass. Use the code AMINT22 as you order, and the books mailed to you will be signed by the authors on a book plate. You'll see more information in the chat. I highly recommend these books for anyone interested in the history of women or the Gilded Age. Both explore the roles put upon women during that rollicking era and the surprising things that women took on for themselves on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, for some formal introductions, and then we'll start right away. Laura Thompson is the author of the bestseller, The Six, a New York Times bestseller. This is The Lives of the Mitford Sisters. Her other books include Life in a Cold Climate, a biography of Nancy Mitford, one of those sisters. She's also authored Agatha Christie, A Mysterious Life, and The Dogs, a book about her personal history of greyhound racing, which she has done since her childhood years, a fascinating story. This book won the Somerset Maugham Award, one of the highest honors in the UK. Laura lives in London, and she is joining us from just outside London today. Also zooming in from that metropolis is our guest author, Esther Crain. But let me first tell you a bit about Betsy Prioleau. I'm sorry, the next slide, please. Betsy Prioleau is a cultural historian and the author of The Circle Eros, Sexuality, in the work of William Dean Howells, a New England favorite. She also authored Swoon, Great Seducers, and Why Women Love Them, and Seductress, Women Who Ravished the World and Lost the Art of Love. She has a PhD in American literature from Duke University and has taught literature and cultural history at Manhattan College and New York University. She is coming to us from New York. Of course, Laura's coming to us from London. We are really crossing the Atlantic here. And also zooming in from the metropolis, again, our guest moderator, Esther Crain. She is the author of The Gilded Age in New York, 1870 to 1910, and New York City in 3D in the Gilded Age. That sounds remarkable, a 3D book. In 2008, she launched the website Ephemeral New York, a site that chronicles that city's past. She speaks regularly on topics relating to New York City history and conducts walking tours that explore New York's hidden pockets and little-known stories. In addition to being today's moderator, Esther and Ephemeral New York are co-presenters of today's program. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, too, to our able partners at GBH Forum Network. Starting right in, we're going to hear first from Laura Thompson, who has tidbits to share and some great images from her book, Heiresses. After Laura speaks for 10 minutes or so, Betsy Prioleau will take the screen with some information and historical images about the celebrated Gilded Age woman, Mrs. Frank Leslie. She is the feature and the star of Betsy's book, Diamonds and Deadlines. As Betsy wraps up, she'll invite on screen Laura and moderator Esther Crain, who will ask some of her questions and then pose some of your questions. So now, finally, Laura, if you are there, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining us from across the puddle. Over to you to hear more about heiresses and all these great women. Laura?
Thank you, Margaret, so much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just outside London today because my car broke down, but I think given the political shenanigans in my home country at the moment, I'm quite glad to be, out in the sticks and away from it all. My book, if we can stop the slides, Andrew, my book, just put up the cover of my book. There it is, Heiresses, The Lives of the $1 Million Babies. It features the Gilded Age. I feel a little bit ignorant compared with my with Betsy and Esther on this subject in a way, because my book, well, it starts in London in the mid 17th century and it goes on till, well, it goes on pretty much till the death of Barbara Hutton in 1979. But in the middle of it all, there is, of course, a whole chunk about the period when American heiresses came over to my country and bailed out impoverished British aristocrats. They got the roof fixed, the American girl got a title, and in theory, everyone was happy except when they weren't. So what I would like to talk about, next slide, please, Andrew, thank you, is this lady, who I'm sure will be very familiar to you all. Alva Vanderbilt, who brokered one of the most famous marriages from this period between her daughter Consuelo and the 9th Duke of Marlborough, which is not that far, but Blenheim Palace, which is where the Marlborough family still live, is not that far from where I'm speaking to you now. I want to talk about Alva because I don't know what sort of press she gets in America, but over here she gets what I think is a bad press. She's regarded as a non-maternal, the woman who forced her daughter into a marriage, an unhappy marriage with a duke, and, you know, a sort of a woman who cared too much about social advancement and all the rest of it. But my contention is that Alva, I adore Alva. She's a heroine. I think she's a feminist icon. She understood. She reminds me a lot of, Margaret has said that I wrote a book about Nancy Mitford. I don't know, some of you may have read Nancy Mitford's book, Love in a Cold Climate, with its extraordinary mother at the center of it, Lady Mondor, who is desperate to get her heiress daughter married off. And the daughter insists on marrying for love. And Lady Mondor says, whoever invented love ought to be shot. And it's the sort of thing I can imagine Alva Vanderbilt saying. She said something like, marriage is not something that should be left to chance. And in a way, the message of the book that I've written, Heiresses, is that love and money really needed to be kept apart if everyone was going to stay happy and sane. And it's the marriages that weren't arranged that were the unhappy ones. And the other thing about Alva, if we can move to the next slide, please. So here's her great palace, her chateau on Fifth Avenue. I know it wasn't the only one, but it's absolutely the most extraordinary. Yeah, if only it still existed. This, where she famously staged the sort of Belle Epoque Met Ball of March 1883, when she sort of did a she was like Hello magazine before its time, giving out little snippets to the press, bringing out what the guests are going to be drinking, what they're going to be eating, made sure that it was the hottest ticket in town and that Caroline Astor would turn up and that there would be the meeting of the old guard and the new money and etc. I mean, what a night if only one had been there. But Alva, who would have made, I don't know, a wonderful businesswoman or probably a damn good president of America, lived in a time when women perforce had to find power in the domestic sphere, in the social sphere, by whom they married, and recognize that. And so if we go on to the next slide, the Marble House at Newport, where it was said she famously imprisoned Consuelo until she agreed to marry the 9th Duke of Marlborough, who was in love with someone else. And Consuelo was in love with someone else. And Alva reportedly bought her a marriage dress from, a wedding dress from Worth when the couple had met once. It sounds awful. Everyone said the marble house for the woman with a marble heart. But what were you supposed to do in that time other than make your way in the world by those means, which fortunately we are lucky enough to have other opportunities and not to have to do this. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the interior of the Marble House. I mean, for goodness sake, the woman had taste. This is European taste. She had a Louis XIV style bedroom, etc., etc. But Europe was the prize. And so she got the Duke of Marlborough to a ball at the Marble House. And then, next slide, please, managed to marry off Consuelo to this man. Consuelo, the tiara was, gave me a headache, she said. This gave me it hurt my neck, etc., etc. Consuelo was unhappy in the marriage. The Duke was unhappy in the marriage. Next slide, please. This is what it was all about. This is Blenheim Palace, which the Marlboroughs never had enough money to run. It was a money pit, and only Vanderbilt money could have got them out of it. But next slide, please. Thank you. And here they are, painted by John Singer Sargent in 1905. The unhappy, the unhappy gilded. This is English Gilded Age. And then next slide, please. Thank you very much. And this is Consuelo when she moved. This extraordinary thing is that as the centuries turned, and the word social acquired a kind of adjunct in the form of social conscience, social responsibility. These two women went into politics. So Consuelo stood as a member of the Progressive Party for the London County Council in Southwark, which was a terribly deprived area in London. Vote for Mrs. Marlborough. And then, next slide, please. And then here's the two women together, by which time Alva, as we know, had become a suffragette and formed the, what was it called? I must get the term right. Political Equality League, and fought for women to get the vote as they did in America in 1920. And when I first read this about Alva, I thought, what on earth? This woman whose life had been getting into Mrs. Astor's ballroom or infiltrating the 400 or whatever, all that stuff that I knew so well from Edith Wharton and was now encountering the reality of. How could she have become a suffragette? But it was as though the times had caught up with this remarkable woman. She was ahead of her times. She was ahead of the game. She knew exactly how to play the game. And now she was in her rightful element. That is how I see her. And so when she died in 1933, and there were female pallbearers at her funeral, that seems to me a very, very fitting end for this remarkable, extraordinary woman, my heroine, Alva Vanderbilt, who in her way, I think, was a friend to women. And now, if I can move, toss the ball, as it were, to my co-panelist, Betsy, and I'm longing to hear what she's going to tell us about Mrs. Frank Leslie.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Margaret, for that wonderful welcome, and American Inspiration Author Series for hosting Women in the Gilded Age. It's so great to be here with distinguished authors, Esther Crain and Laura, to discuss this fabulous topic. So let's begin. Mrs. Frank Leslie was not a typical Gilded Age woman, either in her private or public life. She flouted prescribed femininity. She worked the system and prevailed. Her story is stranger than fiction, a story of hidden secrets, flagrant transgressions, and unthinkable power in a brutal, misogynistic world. She's stranger still is the fact that she's been forgotten. She's on none of the roll calls of famous American women. But in the Gilded Age, she was a national celebrity. She was one of the most famous women in America and a phenomenon. When women were angels in the house, confined to the private sphere and denied financial independence and equality, she ran the largest publishing company in America on cutthroat male terrain for 20 years. Next, she was a brilliant businesswoman. She ran the Frank Leslie Publishing Company and catapulted it to nationwide supremacy. This is just a sample of some of her publications. She saved the empire twice from bankruptcy and made a fortune. She was the 6th richest woman in America and a media mogul. Next, at the time, though, a woman who entered commerce, never mind a captain of industry, was an absolute reject. She violated every feminine norm. She was stigmatized as a man woman, a freak, and a social pariah. Just as bad was a blue stocking. Next slide. Mrs. Leslie, though, was a woman of brains and letters. She was a linguist. She spoke 4 languages. She was an author of 6 books and a play, and a professional lecturer. She was also a translator. You can see just a sample of some of her work there. But this is the incredible thing. She escaped public censure. Next. Thank you. She escaped public censure, which is kind of a miracle. She had her own fan club. She was the 3rd most popular woman in America besides Mrs. Cleveland and Mrs. Vanderbilt. And she was, quote, consecrated as a national idol. The way she pulled it off was a masterpiece. She used the master's tools to invade the master's house. She adopted the persona of the patriarchal ideal woman and traded on her privileged position and her pedestaled ideal to create immunity and get her way. She put this to brilliant use at the office. She assumed the guise of the porcelain Southern belle. She wore the tight black satin gowns with organdy aprons and greeted men in her bijou sanctuary of an office, which you can see on the right, in a musical contralto with a raven quill in her hand. I mean, men were completely disarmed and didn't suspect the hard-knuckle commander, the controls, who wielded a typewriter. She ran the company like a field marshal. She monitored every aspect of the business. She oversaw 400 employees, 99% men, and she managed over 12 publications single-handedly. Her personal life, and we can get to the next slide here, was even more transgressive, if that's possible. Feminine purity in the Gilded Age was sacrosanct, the essence of true womanhood. Women were disembodied, ethereal, angelic beings without sexual passion or carnal knowledge. To dabble in premarital sex, to dishonor the marriage bed, or divorce was to fall into the pit of infamy. America's first female doctor, Elizabeth Blackwell, said, "The Rubicon of chastity once passed, the moral descent is rapid." Well, Miriam Leslie crossed the Rubicon from the start. She was a free luster, as they used to say in that day, with a history worthy of an R-rated tabloid. She spent her youth as a sex worker and as mistress to a Tennessee congressman. After that, next slide, please. She married the prominent anthropologist E.G. Square in the upper left, and lived with him and print baron Frank Leslie in the upper right in a heated 10-year menage a trois. The misadventures didn't stop there. There was an affair with poet Joachim Miller there in the bottom that lasted on and off for 30 years. A fourth marriage to Oscar's brother Willie up there in the middle, and a long list of lovers. And you can see just a few at the bottom. The way she got away with it, next slide, was another camouflage maneuver. She denied everything and posed as the chaste, refined, great lady. She reinvented a genteel, highborn past with an aristocratic, wealthy cotton broker father and life on a plantation. Next slide. Nobody needed to know that she was born illegitimate. Almost certainly the daughter of one of her father's enslaved women. This is a list of possible candidates I found. She grew up in poverty in a house that probably looked something like this in the wrong end of New Orleans, with an absentee father who's a bounder and a bankrupt, and his common law wife, Susan, who, quote, kept a boarding house for men, no questions asked. Now, this is just a euphemism for brothel. Next slide, please. Miriam spent her whole life varnishing her ultra respectable patrician image and marketing it through the press she owned. She opened a select Thursday salon for the cultural elite in Glitterati and showcased the latest haute couture gowns, becoming the fashion icon and tastemaker of the Gilded Age. Next. The mask, though, seems to have grown to her skin. She became obsessed with an entree into high society. She wanted acceptance by the Astor-led elites, the likes of Cornelia Bradley Martin on the left and our friend Al Vanderbilt on the right. There's a real pathos in all of this. Mrs. Leslie was a self-made millionaire and a maverick who succeeded against staggering odds in the real world, a male combat zone. And here she was, seeking the blessing of dull conformists with unearned money and rank and imaginary power in, quote, society. The gatekeepers froze her out and cut her from all of the elite guest lists and social registers. Next, please. Miriam retaliated with a Parthian shot before she died. She created herself Baroness de Bezousse based on a bogus descent from an 18th century French noble. She almost gained a genuine title, marriage to a Spanish marquis, there on the right, Teodoro Martelli Fernandez Cordova, who died just before the wedding. But, next slide. But her greatest Parthian shot was from her deathbed. In a flash finale, she dropped a bombshell. She left the bulk of her $2 million fortune, around $50 million today, to Carrie Chapman Catt up there, president of the National American Suffrage Association for Women's Suffrage, no strings attached. The legacy, the largest ever, and I'm just going to say parenthetically, much larger than anything Alva ever gave, literally ensured passage of the 19th Amendment just when the movement was fractured and circling the drain. Next slide, please. Which begs the question, why has she been written out of the pantheon and women's history? I mean, it's an open question and anybody's guess. It could be the puritanical legacy in feminism, her risque, free-range sex life. Yeah, it could be that she was too glamorous, too off-script. It could be her Machiavellian route to power. It's still a controversial issue. Or it could be that they really didn't like her. I mean, she's not the most lovable female exemplar. She was egocentric, vain, high-handed, devious, and her persona was a tissue of lies. And you know, her passions weren't worthy of her. Time, diamonds, ovations, titles, and ostentatious displays. No more than Alva Vanderbilt and her set, I might add. Yet, despite Mrs. Leslie's flawed, complicated character and checkered past, she was a titanic vanguard figure who tore up the feminine script, faked out the patriarchy, and sidewinded to unimaginable power and influence. The woman of the future is the power of the future, she loved to say. And she wanted women then and now, and her essays are packed with all of this, to enjoy full empowerment in life, love, and work. She would hate my unexpurgated tell-all account of her life, but she would hate even more, believe me, to be forgotten. So now what I'd like to do is just open all of this up to Esther and Laura and the audience for a discussion of all of this.
Well, thanks so much, Betsy, and Laura as well, for bringing these fascinating women into the conversation. One thing that I first wanted to ask you guys is, and Laura, maybe you can go first. What captivated you so much about the characters that you wrote about? I mean, Alva Vanderbilt and Consuelo, obviously there's such a rich story to them, but what made you want to write about them?
I suppose because initially I was kind of asked to write this book, and initially I sort of thought, I don't really care just because they were rich. That doesn't make people interesting at all. And I don't want to write a book about yachts and who had the biggest, diamond in their tiara and all that nonsense. But then, of course, you start to think about it. And sorry, greyhound action behind the door. you start to think about the way money, in the interplay of money and women's lives at a time when money, we think of money as the source of power, but then for a woman, money quite often meant the opposite of power. You know, particularly in the earlier part of my book, before the law changed, and when you got married, the husband got everything. That's like the early grim part of my book. But as it started to get, in a way, it is like I tried to give it a sort of feminist subtext, this book, and sort of make it, underneath the stories is the procession of the slow march toward female equality, if you like. And that's why I love Alva so much, because she seems to me so ahead of the game. Or no, not as ahead of the game as Mrs. Frank Leslie, I might say. She knocked her into a cocked hat, rather, didn't she? But it's just things like, you know, Esther, that mother-daughter relationship is okay. There's the Marble House and there's Blenheim Palace, but it's still the nitty-gritty of that mother-daughter relationship is so recognized. Well, fortunately, my mother is nothing like Alva Vanderbilt, but it's you know, it's just the kind of the realities of human, the dynamic is, the human dynamic is there, but money, it's like, money's like murder. It writes everything large, if you know what I mean, and lays it all bare and does it in technicolor. And but it was still the people, and how some of them could cope with money, some of them just could not, like Barbara Hutton being the uber heiress in that respect, if you like. And it was the interplay of the human nature and money just absolutely fascinated me. The cliche of the poor little rich girl, and if you interrogate that, it really, I don't know, it just, there was so much there, much there.
I like that you mentioned the mother-daughter dynamic. Remind me, was Consuelo Mrs. Vanderbilt's only daughter?
Yes.
Yeah.
She was, wasn't she? She was.
She had all of her unrealized dreams, you know, focused on her, and that's a heavy weight for any young woman to carry.
Well, those mothers were amazing, weren't they, Esther? Because I mean, you ladies obviously living in New York, lucky you. But from the point of view from here, and I see it from the point of view of these aristocrats, all sort of crowding around London society, hoping to nab a Jenny Jerome or a, you know, I mean, it's just so. It's awful in a way, but there's something quite hilarious about it, actually.
We had somebody, one of the audience members put in a comment that Mrs. Vanderbilt sounded like the Kris Jenner of her era, which, you know, what do you think about that?
I think that is absolutely, I wish I'd said that. Can I have that line? That's brilliant.
and that's
so right.
Betsy, Mrs. Frank Leslie claimed that she never wanted children or disliked children. Talk about that, and then just if you could bring it back to, you know, how you found out about Mrs. Frank Leslie, because she is sort of this forgotten figure, and why you decided to write about her. What captivated you about her story?
Well, first of all, about the children, we'll dispatch with that first, because everyone asked about that. She despised children. I mean, she couldn't be in the room with lots of them, and was almost phobic. And so I began to explore that, and I found in the archives letters from her second husband about the fact that she had suffered the loss of a baby. And that was due very likely to the second husband's syphilis, which he transmitted to her. So I think the phobia was connected with pain. And I'm not sure she wouldn't have loved to have had a child, but she made a point of avoiding them. But as far as Mrs. Leslie and why I was attracted to her, that's easy. She's one of the most neglected figures in American history, especially women's history, which is absolutely bizarre when you think of what she achieved and contributions to suffrage and the rest of it. But the way I got there was kind of through the back door. I lived across the street from Madeline Stern, who wrote the first biography of Miriam Leslie, and I went to see her to talk about Victoria Woodhull. And then she mentioned Miriam Leslie, so I read her biography. And then when the centennial of the 19th Amendment rolled around, I remembered Miriam's legacy. I remembered the dramatic will to undo her money. The will was sustained, but the judge at the end said, I cannot discount the possibility that she was actually the daughter of one of her father's enslaved women. So I figured, if Mrs. Leslie's lying about that, what else is she lying about? So that led me on to, that was the starting gun for my research. And I was able to uncover an entire backstory that Madeline Stern never dreamed of, because almost everyone up until my book actually thought that the story of the aristocratic Louisiana background was true, and that she was, a born lady and that sort of thing. But the records showed something very different.
And I just want to also
so
point
much
out
fun to come up with this story that was just really stranger than fiction.
and she actually legally renamed herself Mrs. Frank Leslie. Is that right?
No, it's better than that. When her husband died, he was bankrupt. He left the whole Frank Leslie empire in shambles. But in his will, he left everything to her. She was able to rescue it eventually. But in the will, he left her his name. So she called herself one of her 8 names, because she was one of the great Gilded Age imposters, was Frank Leslie.
Interesting. How much do you think that her being biracial maybe contributed to her being disdained by the very elite Gilded Age women in a time where there were color lines and there was great, racism against African Americans? Do you feel that might have helped, prevented her from breaking through the upper echelon, or even contributed to her being forgotten?
That's an excellent question. I think Miriam Leslie was too smart for that. She was under deep cover. She spent part of her youth in the theater, and she was an expert in theatrical makeup. And she dyed her hair a number of times throughout her life and used skin whiteners. And nobody suspected, except a few reporters in Louisiana. They questioned her Creole coloring. And in some of the early pictures, you can see that her hair is not as straight as she made it later on in her life. But I don't think that was the reason that the first circle excluded her. It had to do with the fact that she was a divorcee. Women in the professions were excluded. And then her pedigree was incredibly murky. They had no idea where she came from. But that was true of so many of the Arabs. I don't think they singled out the mixed race aspect of it. I just think the fact that nobody quite knew who her grandfather was, or her great-grandfather. And it was just a terribly snobby group anyway.
Yeah. Laura, I have a question for you. In your chapter about Alva and Consuelo, and you talked about the, and we saw it, one of the slides was of the John Singer Sargent portrait of Consuelo. And you, in your book, you use the term that it captures her passive power. And I wanted to know if you might explore, what was the passive power of women like Consuelo and Alva, but of other women in the Gilded Age?
Oh gosh, that's
because we think of them as they're these socialites. They're so they're decorations, but they really did have incredible power.
Do you mean sexual power, or do you mean social? Are you talking social power, or
well, really any kind of power to influence their age and to get their way and to make their ways in a world that, the women's sphere was the domestic realm. The men were in the business and outside realm, and they really broke through all that.
Do you think? You're the expert, Esther. So I'm really interested in what you.
Well, I think I think they broke through. Alva Vanderbilt, when after her divorce, when she became Alva Belmont,
Yes.
as you've talked about, she became a huge supporter of the suffrage movement, of working women. She gave countless millions of dollars to the effort.
Yeah.
So I think that you could definitely say she was very powerful.
But that's later. That's sort of early 20th century. I mean, what I meant about Consuelo with the passive power, it's how Sargent depicts those women, those incredible portraits of, I suppose what I mean almost by that is almost sexual power and very much domestic power. And what I was talking about with Alva, that women at a certain, women at that echelon in society or whatever, that was their arena. That was their arena of power. And also in this country, a woman like Maud Burke of San Francisco, who came to London and became Emerald Cunard and sort of dominated London society with her parties, her patronage, all that kind of thing. I suppose what I would consider to be active power is Mrs. Leslie, really, to be perfectly honest. But this is what I'm so interested in, if I can ask a question. Is she an outlier? I mean, how much of an outlier is Mrs. Leslie?
Betsy, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, Betsy.
Yeah. I think that what I know of the Astor Circle and that crowd is they had to conform. All of them, if you think about it, toed the line. I mean, they had, I think it was Edith Wharton who said the price of high society, this is in the Buccaneers, is stifling boredom. And by stifling boredom, it meant hewing to the prescribed feminine ideal. So those women, that's what I meant when I said they had imaginary power, because they had to adhere to it. If you had dinner with Mrs. Astor, for example, there were only 5 topics of conversation that were possible. It was crucial to follow the rules. And the thing that I found so intriguing about Miriam is that although she pretended to follow the rules, beneath the surface, she was operating like one of the power brokers of her day. And to her, it was a masquerade. But I think to these women in high society, they bought into it. I mean, most of them, I don't know about Alva, but some of the other women, they were practically illiterate. I mean, they had almost no education. And here's Miriam, who spoke 4 languages and was a very cultivated person. But as far as the Astor set is concerned, I think you'll find that in every single case, these people were incredibly insipid, and the women were still part of that true woman mold. That is, they were denied education. They were still submissive to men. Now look what Alva put up with William Kay. I mean, that man had more mistresses than you could count. He kept Belle Otero in business in Paris, but she was one of these, compliant women as per the conformist ideal, and put up with it for years, and just pretended to have power in this crazy society. I mean, look, that's not real power in the real world. She didn't make it herself.
No, but so actually you've answered Esther's question. Because the person who's popped into my mind is May Welland in The Age of Innocence, and she has passive power. She has passive power because she is completely insipid, but she actually is the driver of Newland's destiny, is she not? I suppose. Perhaps that's.
I also think that Mrs. Leslie had. Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper was huge and sort of a new thing with these great illustrations that brought people news, information. I think that there's that power that she had there in what she was publishing. Betsy, you would know better than I do what the readership of Frank Leslie's was, but I imagine it was millions of people.
Oh, it was the best, the largest publishing empire in America. He's the father of illustrated journalism in America. He invented something called divisible blocks so that you could produce an illustration in a day instead of a week. And he also brought sensationalism to the newspapers. And he made himself particularly famous with something called the Swill Milk campaign.
Oh, yes.
You remember that. I think I read that in your blog. But at any rate, no, he was a giant in the business. And he gave Miriam responsibility early on for 2 magazines of her own. But she was innovative herself, more so than Frank Leslie, because he let the publishing company collapse by overextension. And she, in the President Garfield assassination scoop, she rescued the whole empire. It was called a minor miracle in the day. No one had ever done anything like that journalistic scoop. I mean, she violated all the rules. She shipped like 30,000 copies of the newspaper to Cleveland for Garfield's funeral. It'd never been done before. I said, you can't do it. Point is, she did, and she triumphed. And she was then the queen of Park Place.
And this is
a sensation. And
this is
so she was quite innovative herself, not just, I mean, Frank Leslie gets all the credit, but she's the one who picked it up from the ruins and rescued it and carried it on. And then it failed again, and then she rescued it a second time.
But the sort of non-wealthy, sort of average readers, would they know who she was in the era? Did she make her own persona known through her publications?
She did. That's the whole point. She owned the media, so she could say whatever she wanted about herself, which is why the whole mythology about herself is so popular still, because she was able to invite the press over, tell them stories, and have them reproduce it in syndicated columns all over America. And at the time, as I said, she was a national celebrity. She had her own fan club. People were fascinated by her.
And these were more not wealthy people. These were regular readers,
Right. These were average Americans, average American women. And again, she was a phenomenon to people. And I think it's just incredible that she was able to gain all of that popularity, all of that acclaim, when she was living this amazingly transgressive life on the down low. I mean, it was quite an achievement. I'm not saying that everyone would admire that clandestine route that she took, which was really a guerrilla tactic of using disguise and deceit and camouflage. But what are you going to do with the dominant power? I mean, that's the only way to combat it. She felt. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but that's why she kept saying, although she was a feminist in her own way, she kept emphasizing the cuttlefish approach to power, the iron hand in the velvet glove. She was insistent that women's best tactic was soft power, a charm offensive.
So she was passive power. She was active power pretending to be passive power.
Yeah, you could say that, or you could just say it was a charm offensive, which isn't passive. To be charming is an active, aggressive act. So no, she was active in her impersonation of the patriarchal perfect woman. She was very active in that and put a lot of effort into it.
Amazing.
So
what I'd love to do now is go see some of the questions that our audience is asking. And this one would be for you, Laura. What was the reaction of English upper class women to the American heiresses entering British society?
That's such a great question. Well, terrified, you can imagine, the mothers. All these gorgeous girls coming over, much better dressed. They'd got their clothes from Worth of Paris, you know. Jenny Jerome was so beautifully dressed and very intelligent and amusing and could play the piano and blah, blah, blah. And they weren't fazed by, you know, all our, English society is, it's so interesting because in the Age of Innocence, Europe is portrayed as the more open society vis-a-vis the equivalent of Mrs. Astor's New York. But of course, we think of it the other way. We think New York is great and open and everything, and that England is uptight. But I suppose that was the cross-cultural thing going on. But they were, I mean, there was a delegation of mothers who went to see the Archbishop of Canterbury and said, what are we going to do about the Prince of Wales,
Wow,
Queen Victoria's son, because he loved them. Of course he did. He loved women, and he loved these incredibly attractive, easy, charming women, easy going, sort of fun. And they went to say, what are we going to do? Because they're having a very we can't cope sort of thing. They were panic stricken that they were going to lose all the good men to these girls, which they did, because it was this strange sort of quid pro quo of American money and English title, blah, 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 as we all know. But then they started to integrate, and it rejuvenated London society wonderfully. And as I say, they were so sponsored by the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VII, that it all kind of bedded in and became part of London society in a very welcome way. But initially, yes, terrified. The competition was too good.
yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Betsy, this is a question you could answer. Was there any evidence that the Gilded Age, the Astor 400 in that crowd read Frank Leslie's newspaper, or was it too lowbrow for them, perhaps?
I'm not sure about that. Of course they did. They must have. I'm absolutely sure that they did. And in the Gilded Age, the television series, twice Aunt Agnes is in the living room. And if you look closely, twice she's reading Frank Leslie illustrated newspaper.
Really?
So someone must have done some research and known that they did read her newspapers. There were too many of them, and she catered to them as well. It was a delicate balance that the Frank Leslie Publishing Company always kept between the upper and middle classes, and later on appealed even to the lower middle classes. So it was always that balance going on. And there were lots and lots of articles, especially about fashion and social news in the Frank Leslie publications.
And as she was trying to break into, the high society of the Gilded Age, how successful was she? Did she ever get ball invitations? Did she go to dinners? Or was it just a, wall that it was very clear that they were not going to accept her?
Oh, it's really, I said, it's pathetic. I mean, not even tragic, because she was so distinguished, and not to be accepted is just bizarre. But the fact is, there was a wall, a complete wall. She was actually snubbed in the street by McAllister and his group. Oh, McAllister was the major gatekeeper of this crowd. And they were scorned. It has a Gatsby-esque feel to it. She was left off of all of the social registers. Now, the social register at one point contained 8,000 names of everybody you could think of, but they never included her. She was on none of the select invited list. She made a big deal that she went to these places, but if you look them up, it would be a public ball like the Liederkranz Ball or some other kind of semi-public event. She tried everything. She volunteered for charity even in order to breach society, but nothing worked for her. She was iced totally.
So I imagine she didn't have a box at the Academy of Music or at the.
You could buy a box, not at the Academy of Music, at the Metropolitan, the new one.
Yeah.
Anyone pretty much could buy a box. I don't think so. She does refer to a box there, but she was never invited to the Astor Ball afterwards. And I'm sure she sat through all, she was there at the beginning of the opera, not at the second act, the way the Astors, fashionably did.
We have another reader question that I want to, that both of you guys could answer. Laura, if you want to go first. Doing your research, what did you discover that surprised you the most about Alva and Consuelo and the backdrop of the story that you tell?
I suppose what surprised me was that I found some stuff. Well, I didn't find it, someone else had found it, but I lighted upon their research. But Consuelo, whose misery about living in this palace was quite performative, and who wrote that misery memoir in, I think it was 1952, saying, all the room, there were so many rooms, but none of them were comfortable.
I was curious did she actually write that, or was it ghostwritten?
Well, exactly, because I kind of got the feeling she did write. Did you think it might be ghostwritten? I don't. But
I've only read snippets of it, and it just felt like such I don't know. It didn't have the sort of verve that I thought. But what do I know? I mean.
No, I know exactly what you mean. But that marriage, what I found out more about that marriage, about how she'd, the man she wanted to marry, Winthrop Rutherford, who Alva sort of stripped out like wallpaper to stop, so that she'd go and marry the Duke instead, that she tried to elope with him within 3 years, and that the Duke of Marlborough was very upset about it, even though he's always been portrayed as this, it's a little bit Charles and Diana, I felt, actually, that all the sympathy was with the woman, but actually it was a little bit more complicated than that. I'm not apportioning blame either way here, but it was just, there was a little bit more to it. So that all of that really, really interested me. And I suppose what interested me was that I ended up liking Alva more than Consuelo. As you heard from my little tribute to her, I thought I thought she was more honest somehow.
Yeah.
But I'm presumably you're going to ask Betsy. I'm intrigued to hear how she will say.
Betsy, take it away.
Well, the most surprising thing to me is, you probably guessed, was the discovery of Miriam Leslie's past. This was really a shock. I had no idea that she was really almost certainly the daughter of one of her father's enslaved women. Thanks to archival research, this list came up of possible candidates for her mother. And then that all came together with more research. Her father brought 6 enslaved people to New Orleans. Of those 6, 3 or 4 were women of childbearing age. Then I discovered that Miriam's stepsister was there on the scene, and said, of course, everyone knew that she was the daughter of one of the father's enslaved women. So that was exciting. But then to find out it was always speculated that she'd had this life as a prostitute. I'm putting that in quotes because that's what was used then. And sure enough, in all these Supreme Court records, incredible, I found letters from her brother that referred to her going to public balls, which was where prostitutes hung out, and where she was, quote, and I hear he said, "You're well up in the market." And then there were other letters that I found from one of E.G. Squeer's friends, referring to her activities when he was gone. And the Tennessee congressman, all that stuff sort of came up out of all the research. So I want to say here, just for a moment, to lift a little tribute to all of the research sources that I had. I mean, when I think about it, it's just extraordinary that people, even 50 years ago, didn't have access to all of those Supreme Court records they can get now from Google, accessible archives and all of that.
Yeah,
it's just extraordinary what you can dig up. So that was the big surprise for me, is uncovering this sort of life in the shadows, I would say.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. We have an audience member who's asking, and you can, both Laura and Betsy, what can you recommend, any books or any sources that give us a fuller picture of sort of the average woman of the era who is reading Frank Leslie's and might be, knows about Mrs. Frank Leslie, but or Alva and Consuelo and the Vanderbilts and society, but they have no chance of ever being, part of that world, not even that they might want to be. But are there any resources that uncover the lives of the more average middle class or lower class woman of the Gilded Age that you've come across that you could recommend?
I think the newspapers are the best source of that, because many of the popular newspapers tell the stories of average people. This is especially true of the newspapers in the Middle West. The book Prairie, what is her name? The book, there's some books about women in the West, and I don't have them right at hand right now. And that's a wonderful resource. What is her, anyway, I can't think of the title, but any of the books about women who moved west give you an idea of the average life of a woman in the Gilded Age who didn't have servants, who didn't have money, who were struggling on the prairie. Prairie Fires, that's the name of the book I'm thinking of. It's an excellent account. And then books about San Francisco and the women there. This was another rough and ready place of average women struggling to get along. I'll have to think of a good bibliography, but I admit there's a real lack there of stories, mainly because these women didn't have a chance to leave their records in the same way and they weren't recorded nearly as much, because high society was the romance of the Gilded Age, and that's what people wanted to read about.
You mentioned newspapers and other publications first when you were answering the question, and that made me think that I know I can say personally that some of the archives from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper are actually, they really do give an idea of maybe what poorer women are going through, immigrant women. There was a illustration that I just posted on Ephemeral New York on Sunday of immigrant women and men crowded on a roof sleeping because the tenements were so hot, and people would sleep on their roofs, they would sleep in the street just because the tenements was, when there's a heat wave in New York City, you just can't, those rooms are stifling. And it really struck a chord with readers, I have to say. Just the illustration, really, people really could feel just the horror of having to survive in those tenements where 2/3 of the city was living at the time.
Yeah, I have to recommend your blog here, because that is packed with stories of the average American woman, particularly the tenement life. You have done extraordinary work there, and I recommend everybody to that blog, because it's just stocked with information about that.
That's
Laura,
so interesting. Yes, sorry, Esther.
No, I just was going to ask you for your thoughts of there any resources that you could point people to where maybe the more I know you're not a Gilded Age historian necessarily, but just sort of what the regular woman of the era was doing and thinking and how they were living.
You see, I don't know, and I'm just fascinated because the subject of my book was rich women, really, and of course you're always aware, like when the famous was it the Bradley Martins who had the ball in 1893, and you're aware that, guys, come on,
right.
This is
that's that turning point where people started to kind of rebel or just stop thinking and idolizing the rich, because that was a terrible recession going on, and something like 25% of New York City was out of work then.
Unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. And they're all sort of dressed, there's JP Morgan dressed as Moliere, and it's absolutely true. But I so want to read can you say the name of your blog again? Because I really want to read that.
It's Ephemeral New York.
Right.
And you can just Google Ephemeral New York and get it, but it's ephemeralnewyork.wordpress.com.
And it's the Gilded Age, the beneath the gilt, as it were. Is that what's going on?
Well, I cover all of the city history, but with an emphasis on the Gilded Age, partly because that's what interests me of all the eras, but also because the great thing about the Gilded Age is we have this wonderful archive of photography is now possible. There's photos of so many interesting things. There's mass media to draw on. So there's a lot of research possibilities with the Gilded Age that you don't have with, say, the colonial era, or the antebellum era in New York.
Oh, it's so interesting. Right. Okay.
Well, I have found this so very, very interesting. And you all have taught us a tremendous amount of, who was written in and who was written out of the pantheon of women at that time, following the rules and what it meant, and who didn't and what that meant. It's been truly eye-opening. Thank you all three of you. As we do for all our American Inspiration author events, we've asked both these authors to read to us briefly from their books in closing. And I really have enjoyed both these very brief readings. Over to you first, Laura, and then to Betsy.
Okay. So thank you, Margaret, and what a pleasure to talk to you two. I've loved it. This reading from my book is this isn't about the Gilded Age. It's about women who were contemporaries of Consuelo, but who led a completely different life, who went to Paris, who knew people like Hemingway and Joyce and the other side, the Americans in Paris. But these were women, and they were women who loved women. They were not, so therefore money and love were easier to keep apart. So the passage begins, without men, but with money. That was the formula for a new design for living. These women, Romaine Brooks, the painter, Natalie Barney, salonière, Winnaretta de Polignac, so she was the singer heiress who became a great patron of the arts, Gertrude Stein, were near contemporaries of Consuelo Vanderbilt. Like her, they were American-born and moved to Europe at a formative age. Then their stories abruptly diverged. Their sexuality impelled them to seek a different path. And what a very good thing that was. One can even argue that it was necessary at that time in order to take full control. They became, as Romaine Brooks did in her self-portrait, 1923, she's in a man's coat and hat, they became their own men. In the dusk and champagne-colored streets of Paris, exquisitely formal yet alight with bohemianism, they found a world that was briefly defined by the golden principle of freedom. What a time this must have been. The art was as jagged and alive as a crack of lightning. The air was charged with a sense of purposeful change. It was an ambience in which a woman with sufficient means could be mistress, spectacularly so, of her own destiny. Over to Betsy.
Thank you. Well, I love that. And thank you. This was all so much fun. So this is just a brief summary of Mrs. Frank Leslie and what she meant to America and to American women. Many of her values, distasteful now, reflect cultural norms, the worship of aristocracy, disdain for the poor, and prejudice toward African Americans and other minorities. For all that, she was light years ahead of her time. A law unto herself, she smashed the feminine mold, jettisoned the rule book, and built her own empire in command of herself, her narrative, and her money. She also presages the future. Her character and career addressed concerns central to women today: the glass ceiling, female leadership, sexual agency, and image management. She was a high-handed grande dame with serious failings. But she suggests how a woman of grit and swish can live large, attain unimagined heights in a hostile world, and have men at her bidding in the bargain.
What remarkable passages. I love the freedom of these women and their opportunity, what they were given and what they had to grab for themselves on both sides of the Atlantic. Thank you so much for both those readings. Truly, truly remarkable. A reminder to our audiences, tonight's featured books, Heiresses, The Lies of the $1 Million Babies by Laura Thompson, and Betsy Prioleau's Diamonds and Deadlines, A Tale of Greed, Deceit, and a Female Tycoon in the Gilded Age. Both these books are available for purchase through our partners at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Mass. Use the code AMINS22 as you order, and the editions you receive will be signed by the authors on a book plate. As you've just seen, both these women have opened new doors into some interesting areas of women's history, and we hope you'll explore these areas through continued reading. Moving toward closing, I really want to thank Esther Crain for her remarkable research and all that she added to today's program, and also for her brilliant website, Ephemeral New York. She launched this website in 2008. Every week, Ephemeral New York is updated with new, original posts, stories, and images exploring lesser-known aspects of the city's rich history. Many of these stories are focused on how Gilded Age New Yorkers lived, and they experienced the 19th century metropolis at all levels of income. You can visit and subscribe to Ephemeral New York at ephemeralnewyork.wordpress.com, or just Google it. Do check out this unique resource. I am so happy, Esther, that you joined us today. And
thank you, Margaret. I could talk all afternoon.
Well, you may get emails. You never know. There are so many questions here, and I don't know how you do what you do, but you moderated this so well, and you cover such a remarkable amount of history.
Well, I had two fantastic authors and books to draw on, which I highly recommend both of them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And we recommend your books as well. We at American Ancestors NEHDS are delighted to have co-presented today's book talk with Esther and also with GBH Forum Network. If you're researching a time in history, a community, or a family, you will find our library and education center useful. Our stacks on Newbury Street in Boston are open to the public, and NEHDS members can delve into our digital archives, gaining access anytime to 1.4 billion searchable family records. Free to the public, you can chat online with one of our genealogists. I recommended this to a couple of you in the Q&A who had specific questions. Our Brew Family Learning Center hosts many educational and art and architecture programs aimed at all levels of historians. On July 8, tomorrow, join us for a free program featuring a curator from Boston's Museum of Fine Arts. He'll discuss art collecting in Renaissance Venice. Later this month, get advice about digitizing your family collection, questions that we all have these days. You can register for all our programs at americanancestors.org/events. And for you literary sorts like me and all of us on screen today, on July 14th, we're having another one of our virtual author talks. We'll welcome the retired CNBC anchor Bill Griffith with his new work, Strangers No More. This true family story follows on his best-selling first book about a DNA discovery that rocked his world. He'll be in conversation with one of my favorite journalists, Libby Copeland, the author of The Lost Family. She is really quite insightful about DNA today and what it means to us doing this type of research. On August 22, join us for a look at the history of alcohol and its intersection with medicine. Cocktails and spirits expert Camper English will discuss his new book, Doctors and Distillers, with moderator Richard Ford Thompson, the Stanford law professor and author of Dress Codes. This should be a really fun summer night, a mix of education and entertainment. And on August 30, we'll get back to work to our business of researching when we hear from historian and professor Daniel Bauk. He will take us behind the scenes at the US Census, throughout history, discussing his new book, Democracy's Data, the hidden stories of the US Census and how to read them. It's a really important topic for right now as we're all delving through new archives. Okay, so back to today. Our mission at NEHGS is to educate, inspire, and connect people. We hope we've accomplished that in the past hour. To today's brilliant guests joining us from outside London and two of you from New York, all zooming into GBH here in Boston. Thank you from all of us for your enlightening conversation, a window into history. And to our audience, thank you for hopping on board for this American Inspiration event and for your continued curiosity and your shared love of history. For those of you new to the series, welcome. We hope we'll see you soon again. Meanwhile, keep reading and a good day to all of you. Thank you, ladies. We'll see you soon again, I hope. Take care.